All right. Good morning. Shit. Get settled in here. I just finished my coffee. Um, Hope everything is set up. I look like crap because I basically just woke up not that long ago, but that's all right. I wanted to get this. We we have a lot of issues here in the U.S. and you know, looking at this whole Minnesota fraud scandal with the Smalleys and what's been going on there. I've been thinking a lot about some the history of South Africa and Africa in general, and what that means to us in the U.S. and how we can look at what's happened there and utilize that information to better structure ourselves here in the U.S. and some of the conversations that have been had over the last few years about intentional societies and corporate societies and all these different structures. I mean, you can look at like I don't know. We'll get into a couple of different things here as we go, but I want to start off talking a little bit about South Africa and the history of South Africa. I watched this incredible uh, historian, uh, Eric Lowe from he's a Afrikaner from South Africa. He was involved in the ANC and the anti-apartheid regime, and around the time that the ANC took power, he left South Africa for Australia because he realized what was happening was not going to be safe for his children and him. He has since given up his Marxist ways and moved more into a a liberal centrist liberal position, kind of the default position. He was a professor um, in both South Africa and Australia. He's written several books. There's a couple of really interesting books that he's written that I'm interested in reading about apartheid and about the destruction of the Afrikaner culture and society, which is occurring. Like they'll tell you there's no genocide, and when they tell you that, they mean like the farm murders is not or farm attacks is not a genocidal like act, but you can look at what's happening culturally to the Afrikaner and how they're trying to rid the country of their language and their cultures and divide these people. Trump's kind of playing into their hands by offering refugee status, but I'm not against the refugee status. I think it's kind of a double-sided. It's difficult. Um, because if you take all the Afrikaners out of um South Africa and you bring them to the U.S., they're hardworking, faith-driven people um, that are exceptional. They're really interesting people. They're so much fun to be around. Um, but there's a real possibility that they lose their culture coming coming to America. And I know there are attempts for um, these communities to stay in touch with each other after coming to America. Um, there's Lily Fondi Plus who's doing. she does like vlogs and stuff like that on YouTube talking about the experience of being a refugee in America and how different it is from South Africa. And I know there was a lady in Houston that let me see if I can pull that up. See, where would that be? Here. I know I haven't shared my screen yet. Hold on, I'll share it. There's a lady in Houston that has made attempts to make Afrikaans an accredited language in schools. And see, I type so slow it doesn't even matter. Safari failed to open page. Oh, what the hell? Let me try again. Houston School Afrikaans. Mm, see. In Houston, you won't typically find Afrikaans taught as a standard language in public schools, as it's a language from South Africa. However, some international schools, like the Auti International School, focus on languages like French or offer IB programs. Um, mm, Sharpstown, Afrikaans teachers, tutors, schools. Anyway, I heard there was an Afrikaner lady that was pushing for Afrikaans to be taught in school. Uh, Lomi Creel. That sounds like an Afrikaans name, but she works for the Houston Chronicle. I'm not saying it. Lily Van de Plas had said that there was a lady, an Afrikaner lady in Houston that was pushing for Afrikaans to be taught in schools in order to help save the culture and the language of the Afrikaner. I'm for all for that. I know a little bit of Afrikaans. I don't speak it well. It's hard for me. It's harder to read than it is to understand. Like sometimes when Beatrix speaks Afrikaans, I know exactly what she's saying. Sometimes I have no idea what she's saying because she speaks like very quickly at times. So it's a little difficult learning from her just because of how fast that she speaks in Afrikaans. But yeah, there's an attempt at least to push Afrikaans as an elected language that's accredited and recognized in schools in Houston and Dallas, and they're talking about um, building community centers, immigration community centers for Afrikaans culture and speaking. And that's I'm all for it. Let the communities come together there locally. I know in Houston there are Afrikaans shops. There was one in Memorial that we used to go to. It was mainly a sandwich shop, but they sold Gatsby's, and you were able to do some Afrikaans shopping and get some of the types of like cookies and treats that they had in South Africa. I'm not sure we had found some different stuff, and I know up near where my parents live in the Woodlands area, there's a Afrikaans meat market up there that sells, boerewors and different types of sausages and meats and mutton and they have like a little grocery section. But it's hard getting the stuff from over there. Beatrix makes her own biltong. So we keep that, bunny chow is incredible. It's so good. It's so good. Um, and and so we do everything we can to to keep that alive, as best as we can, just on our end. Um, but yeah, I think it's really smart if you're going to be bringing these refugees in from South Africa. Um, I wouldn't say assimilation is going to be that difficult. I mean, for them because they are definitely hard workers and they come from Dutch Reformed Church, which is a I would say, I mean, I haven't been to a Dutch Reformed church, but it just from what I've uncovered, it seems quite Protestant, and so you might be seeing some Dutch Reformed churches pop up, um, in the cities. Uh, but I mean, for the most part, they're not that different than Americans, Protestant, just typical Protestant Americans. Most of them are rural, but have been educated in urban areas, like Johannesburg or Pretoria. Um, they they're they're good people. They're a lot of fun. They like to barbecue. They call it braai, but they like to barbecue, man. It's a blast. They drink beer and just have a good time. And so I think they'll fit in just fine. And you can actually find one of their beers at Specs uh, here in Texas. We have Specs Liquor. I don't know if Specs exists outside of Texas, but there's they have Vindhoek at the Specs, and it's probably the best beer I've ever drank. It's really good. So if you get a chance to try Vindhoek, it's actually Namibian, which Windhoek is the capital of Namibia. But but it's really good. But yeah, so it's an interesting dilemma we find ourselves in because um but because there is this kind of like push to wash the culture out of the Afrikaner, out of the Boer, and to make them English. And there has been for 500 years. So we're going to look at that. I'm going to share my screen. Let's see. Now, I'm going to go ahead and share sound too, because there's part of a video we're going to check out here in a bit. We're going to share this. And let's see. I hate it when it does this. Where's my. Here we go. Okay. So this is South Africa in, let's say, this early 1700s. You look down here, you see Cape Town down at the left hand corner. That's where the Dutch East India Company first landed. They first landed in Cape Town. The Dutch East India Company was shipping goods and materials around the the Cape of Good Hope. So they were coming down through the Southern Pacific, down around into the Indian Ocean over here. Cape Town originally started as an Indonesian colony. It was the Indonesian branch of the Dutch East India Company that had set this up. The Dutch were the main workers of for the Dutch East India Company, but uh, they did have slaves that were both Indian and Indonesian. When the Dutch East India Company set up here in Cape Town, this western portion from Kimberley down to Cape Town, this western portion was inhabited. Well, it wasn't really inhabited. There was a nomadic tribe of people that traveled around this western section. So this German Southwest Africa, this is where Namibia is. This is where Botswana is, right up in here, or yeah, right up in here. This Transvaal, or the South African Republic, is now known as Gauteng. This is where Pretoria, Johannesburg is. This is Natal. From, I think it's about here down here is all one area now known as KwaZulu Natal. This area here was known as Zululand. This is Durban was a major port. You got the Orange Free State. Okay, so what happened was the Dutch East India Company set up a little trade market here, and they had their little trade center here in Cape Town. And they allowed some of the Dutch to become farmers, to grow crops for the sailors, the people that were taking the goods around into Indonesia. So they would pit stop here in Cape Town, hang out for a few days, drink in the colony, eat the food, hang out, resupply, and then they would continue on their way around into the Indian Ocean, heading towards Indonesia. The Khoisan were a nomadic tribe in this area from, I'd say, probably like this area right here, and down into Cape Town, up from Kimberley down into Cape Town and into Namibia and parts of Botswana. But they were nomadic. They were pastoralists. So they had goats and sheep and cows and all that they would travel. They would just travel around the country. Well, after the Dutch got there, they kind of pushed them away from Cape Town and pushed them a little bit further north because they didn't want to be intermingling, because they felt that the Khoisan were were not advanced enough to be valuable workers and employees because of the way they lived. And if you go up into like in Namibia, there's a place called Spitzkoppe that I went to. You'll see like the cave paintings where they had painted like out like what they had run into, like if they had seen lions or giraffe in the regions around the Spitzkoppe, that they had seen these things. So they did these cave paintings kind of as maps and stories of their travels. Excuse me. Yeah, I'm still suffering from this like sore throat and congestion, so just bear with me. So, but when the Dutch landed and they had the Indians and the Indonesians, the slaves working in Cape Town as their lower skilled workers, loading the ships, taking care of the amenities, cooking, et cetera, et cetera. This is where you get a lot of the different types of. They ended up calling they call these people now the Cape Malay, like Malaysian. They call them the Cape Malay. A lot of the food is influenced by Indonesia and India, which is where you would get like a bunny chow or a boboiti is more of an Indonesian. They call it Malay food, but it was more of an Indonesian style food. And so the Dutch came, and much like the settlers in the US, they brought smallpox. And so smallpox destroyed the Khoisan. And so the Khoisan came in, and the Dutch felt so sorry for them. They brought them into Cape Town, into that settlement, and took care of them. Their tribal leaders had been wiped out. Many of the Khoisan tribe had been wiped out. It was already a small nomadic tribe that was kind of sparse and kind of separated. The Khoisan then began to marry and intermingle with the Indians and the Indonesians, and this is where you get the Cape Coloreds, which is in South Africa. Colored is its own race. It's a different type of people. The Khoisan were not like what you would consider like a black, um, uh, African. They look more Asian. Their skin's more caramel. They look more Asian. Um, and they're very interesting people. Beatrix loves the coloreds, which is basically what you hear. Now, when we were in Namibia, the gentleman that had helped us with our rental truck, he was Khoisan, and my father-in-law and him got along so well. They speak Afrikaans. They because they intermingled in Cape Town on the settlement, they kind of became part of the Afrikaner tradition, but they kind of have that they have their own culture and their kind of own way of doing things, but they intermingle really well with the Afrikaans speaking Afrikaner because and they began to speak Afrikaans. Well, during this period when the Boer began to farm this region, excuse me, they they wanted the Dutch East India Company were trying to limit the amount of settlers. But the Dutch so loved the land and so loved the region that they wanted to begin setting up settlements. The Huguenot French Huguenots began to come down and settle in this area. So the Dutch began to intermarry with the Huguenots. This is where what we know today as Afrikaners comes from. It's the intermarrying of the French and the Dutch, which is very interesting to find out because, like, one of the things I had told Beatrix whenever I first met her was like, like maybe it's Dutch that you're speaking. Maybe Afrikaans is a derivative of Dutch, but it sounds a lot like French. Well, the Huguenots were, they spoke like basically like Flemish, and Flemish is kind of like an intermingling of Dutch and French, and it kind of the language just kind of intermingled. They created their own language, Flemish. Well, this is what happened in South Africa. The Huguenots and the Dutch intermarried, and you created Afrikaans, which is why Afrikaans is very similar. It's much more similar to Flemish than it is to Dutch nowadays. Even though I think Beatrix has told me that she can understand Dutch for the most part if she does get in a situation where she has to talk to somebody who's from the Netherlands and speaks Dutch. So this all started around 1650, right? Um, just for a point of reference, Eric Lowe, the professor that I was talking about earlier, his family came into Cape Town in 1658. So the Afrikaner or the Boer, however you want to say it, began to settle up. Well, they created what is known as the Boer Republic, which was Transvaal and the Orange Free State. These were the Boer republics. Then you had Natal, you had Zululand, and then you had now what's known as the Western Cape, which is like this area right here, and then the Eastern Cape, which is like this area here, where East London. I think Port Elizabeth is in the Eastern Cape. A lot of people have heard of Port Elizabeth. Durban is in Natal, north of the Eastern Cape. Cape Town is in the Western Cape. So in the 1700s, the British began to come in and they wanted to settle this. They had been traveling, they had been, setting up their colonies and empire all through Africa. So they began to come in. Well, they wanted to anglicize the Dutch. The Dutch wanted no part of it. So what they began to do is they began to travel into these regions and they go into Natal and they find uh, an Afrikaner settlement in Natal and they wanted to control all the ports. So that they wanted to control Cape Town, East London, Port Elizabeth, and Durban. They wanted to control all the ports in the coast of South Africa. So instead of fighting, The Dutch just went back into the Orange Free State, Transvaal, and they started migrating up into Rhodesia, which is now Zimbabwe. They also went, then you had the German settlements in the west in Namibia. They began to the Boer began to travel through Botswana into Namibia as well. So you get this kind of intermingling of the German and Afrikaans over here. You have the English down in this region. And by this time, they had taken over Zululand, Natal, all through the Cape of Good Hope. And the Afrikaner was basically just these two Boer republics. The English then began to bring in black labor. So when they took over Natal and Zululand, they had the Xhosa and the Zulu, who were warring tribes up in here. So the British were like, well, this is our land now. We defeated you guys in battle. So what we're going to do is we're going to charge you taxes. Well, these tribes had no idea what currency was. That's not the way that they went about living their lives. So the British forced them into slave labor, basically, and charged them taxes on the money that they were paid in order to control them. So they began to move the Xhosa down into the Cape of Good Hope and the Zulu into Natal. And this was, I don't know, getting close to the 1800s. Well, in the meantime, up in this area, Transvaal, near Johannesburg, the Afrikaner had discovered diamonds and gold. And if you look in the Fabianism in the Empire, a manifesto by the Fabian Society, they talk about this. They talk about how South Africa the problem is still more complicated than in India, for in it neither democracy nor bureaucracy will serve alone, however modified. We are confronted there with colonies demanding democratic institutions in the midst of native races who must be protected despotically by the empire or abandoned to slavery and extermination. And it is the Conservative Party which has gone to war professedly on behalf of democracy, whilst the anti imperialist liberals have the appearance of supporting the Boer oligarchy against it. What has really happened, however, is that a troublesome and poor territory, which the empire cast off into the hands of a little community of farmer immigrants, has unexpectedly turned out to be a gold reef. This is Johannesburg. And the empire accordingly takes it back again from the farmers. So this was written in 1900. The Second Anglo-Boer War was taking place at this time. It took place between 1899 and 1902. If the empire were a piece of private property belonging to England, as most Englishmen think, and the Transvaal, a farm privately owned by President Kruger, as the president explicitly affirmed without contradiction from Sir Alfred Milner, who was the president of the Free State, Orange Free State, at the Bloemfontein Conference, the transaction would be more brigandage. And it may be conceded that to citizens and statesmen who are dominated by the morality of private property, the war must be demoralizing if they are on the side of the empire and shocking if they are on the side of the farmers. So the problem is that some of the Dutch that remained in the Cape and didn't settle up in Transvaal or the Orange Free State became anglicized and became more English. And that was the British's, that's what the British wanted. So they were trying to convince the Boer, the Afrikaners, to become Englishmen and to abandon their culture, to abandon their language, and to speak English and just be Englishmen. If you're Englishmen like us, then we'll take care of you. You'll be part of the empire. But if you resist and you are, are determined to be self determinative, then we're going to have a problem. And that's what happened. The Boer resisted, they went to war, right? So the English brought in thousands of troops through Cape Town and went to war with the Boer Republic or Boer Republics. Some of the Boer continued migrating up into Rhodesia, setting up farms up in Rhodesia, which turned out to be devastating, as we know, when Mugabe took over. A lot of the Boer were taken into concentration camps. This was the first use of concentration camps. They were put into concentration camps um, to be re-educated. Their farms were burned. Their wives were and children were murdered. They were eventually released on basically like a work program to be slave labor for the empire. But the Englishmen always had this issue, like especially like Cecil Rhodes, who came in and he developed the economy of South Africa as part of the British Empire. The problem was they looked like them, and they looked at these African tribes as one people, and the coloreds and Indians and Indonesians as another people, and the Boer as their people. So they were trying to intermingle the Boer with the British Empire. So they began employing the Boer in the mines around Johannesburg specifically. Once let out of the concentration camps, many of the Boer men went to Pretoria and Johannesburg because that was the center of the economy of South Africa. That was the only place to work, finance, earn money, and all of that. Well, in this process, they had been bringing in the Zulu and the Xhosa and several of the other tribes that had migrated from the north of Africa. So just to give you an idea about that, what was happening when the Dutch settled in Cape Town, the only people in this area were the Khoisan. At simultaneously from the area between Cameroon and Nigeria, the black Africans were settling down along the east and the west. So you had, and then within these black tribes, you had you had different tribes pop up. You had the Zulu, you had the Xhosa, you had the Shona, eventually the Motabele, the Indabele. You had many of these tribes begin to pop up. And they kind of segmented themselves, created their own languages, their own cultures, their own religions. All these different things began to appear from the black population that was coming from the Cameroon Nigerian area down into the southern portion of Africa. So in about 1750, these tribes met. The Afrikaners were settling, going north and east in settlements, and the black Africans, the Xhosa specifically, were coming down south and towards the west. And there's a place, I think it cuts like South Africa in half, like right around here somewhere, called Fish River. They called it the border. On the northern and eastern portion of the Fish River, you had the blacks. On the southwestern portion, you had the whites or the Afrikaners. They met there in the 17, I think it was 1750s, and they had a war, and they warred against each other for several, like damn near 100 years as the Boer began to continue to farm and move up through here. So this area was controlled by the Xhosa and the Zulu, whereas this area was empty. The Matabele had broke off from the Zulu and moved over to Bloemfontein over in this area. The Afrikaners were farming in this area. The Matabele attacked the Afrikaners. The Afrikaners fought them off. The Matabele ended up going into southern Rhodesia up in here, and they were eventually slaughtered by Mugabe, who was Shona, because they had conducted war against the Shona years before. As you see, these tribal relations continue into all the way up to today. You still have different languages. You still have KwaZulu Natal over here, which is mainly Zulu. And then you have the Xhosa spread through the Cape of Good Hope and up through Gauteng and Bloemfontein. So what the English ended up doing is they ended up bringing setting up townships outside of the major cities. So you had, let's say, Johannesburg over here and Pretoria. Oops, didn't mean to do that. Whatever. You have Johannesburg and Pretoria over here. They set up these mines around these urban centers. They moved the English into the urban centers, and they moved the Afrikaner, the Zulu, the Xhosa, and the Khoisan out into the townships, the poor townships around the city centers, so that they could access the mines and work for the English, but not be intermingling with the English, because the English had already been in, implementing segregation in all the colonies that they had set up. Well, the Afrikaner didn't like this because they had set up their own republics. They wanted their own republics. They wanted their own place, right? They were like, we set up our own place. We very rarely intermingled with these people. We didn't talk to these people. They were warring against us. They would attack our farms. So they had set up what came to be known as the commandos, which were like, um, imagine like a neighborhood watch kind of deal, where they would help each other and assist each other if their farms were attacked by these tribes, mainly the Zulu and the Xhosa. I mean, you had the Sutu, which you ended up, part of them ended up down here in if you look at South Africa, there's this little landlocked country called Lesotho, which is like a mountainous region where the Sutu had fled from the Zulu into the mountains and set up their own tribal area, and it's still recognized today as its own nation. So they had intermingled with all of these different tribes, and because the English just looked at them as cheap black labor, they didn't differentiate whether you were Xhosa, Sutu, Zulu, Indabele, Matabele. It didn't matter to the English. They were like, it doesn't matter. You're cheap black labor, and you're going to go work in the mines. The Afrikaner, wanting its own place, put in petition to the English to be separated, because they saw that the English were separated from the black tribes, but the Afrikaner was forced to live amongst them. And they were like, we don't intermingle with these cultures. We don't understand these cultures. There was theft and murder and rape and all kinds of things happening in the townships. And the Afrikaner was like, this isn't how we live our lives. We don't want to live like this. So then the English began to set up partitions for the Afrikaners to separate the Afrikaners from the Zulu, the Xhosa, the Sutu, etc. The Afrikaner eventually worked their way into management positions to where they were controlling the mines. The blacks were working for them. This was going on for hundreds of years. I mean, you're talking about the discovery of gold in like the 1800s. The Anglo-Boer War took place, ended in 1902. The Boer were impoverished, were basically a slave class, forced out into these townships, um, convinced the English to or not 1902, I think it was 1910 actually, because in 1911 they actually got division between the Afrikaner and the black tribes because of the living conditions that the Afrikaner were not used to. Eventually, they worked their way up into management positions and higher authority within the mining community. So now you're looking at the 30s whenever they start conceiving of apartheid. And in the 40s, I think it was 48, somewhere around 40, I think it was 48, they actually, apartheid come into, became law within South Africa. The, uh, the English had one idea of what apartheid would be. The Afrikaner had another idea of what apartheid would be. The English looked at apartheid as segregation, as you would have seen in the U.S. Right, black water fountains, white water fountains, black entryways, white entryways, black townships, white suburbs. That's kind of how the English viewed apartheid. The the Afrikaner, on the other hand, they had a completely different idea of what this was. The Afrikaner believed that apartheid was to reestablish the Boer republics and the Zululand, uh, uh, the Xhosa territory, Lesotho, et cetera, et cetera. So it was going to be, from what I understand, it was to be somewhere between 11 to 13 different nations, and that they would work together, that the Afrikaner would continue to allow the Zulu and the Xhosa and the Sotho and the Ndebele to all work within the Boer republics in the mines to earn income, to increase their lot in life, and to better themselves economically, but they would not live amongst each other. They would live in their own separate nations and just work, you know, together in the mining communities and the different, different uh, operations that were being set up in South Africa. That was the ultimate goal. Obviously, that did not work out. So all this time, the English continue to bring in cheap labor. They continue to import cheap labor from Zambia, which would be right over up here somewhere in Zambia, and now what's now Zimbabwe, Nigeria. And they continued. Then you had Mozambique, which set up right in this area over here, and they just continued to import all this cheap labor into South Africa. At that time, you're looking at about 25%. Now you're talking when the Afrikaner first landed in Cape Town, the Dutch first landed in Cape Town, it was majority. This was a majority white colony here. By the time the English had their way and the 1940s rolled around, it was 25% white, 75% black, Indian, Indonesian, um, colored at that time. So they had gone from being the majority from when they settled to the minority once the English had set up the nation of South Africa. And that's like when you look at the immigration into the United States, I imagine this because I mean, here in Texas, we've always known like Venezuelans don't get along with Salvadorians, don't get along with Colombians, don't get along with Mexicans, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. These are all different people. They're not the same person, right? When you start, if you call a Salvadorian a Mexican, they're gonna get mad at you. They're like, I'm not fucking Mexican, I'm Salvadorian, right? This was kind of like the what they were dealing with in Africa, in South Africa specifically, but all of Africa, setting up all these borders, coming and colonizing and setting up these borders. They were setting these borders up around several tribes. Like you have 54 black countries, but each one of those countries has like 40 different tribes living within the borders of those nations. Well, the Europeans didn't understand the tribal aspect of what was going on. So to this day, you have these failed states, these failed nations, whether it would be in Somalia, Ethiopia, um, Libya. I mean, you can, that's a completely different story. Um, South Africa, Namibia, wherever, they're considered failed states because you have these warring tribes within this border that create these warlords, and these warlords run these tribes like we would consider them like gangs, but they're not gangs. They're tribes. They're Zulu or Xhosa or Lesotho or Sutu or Ndebele or Matabele or Shona, and this is where Mugabe, like when Mugabe came to power in Zimbabwe, changed the name from Rhodesia to Zimbabwe. And then the first thing he did is he went to war with the Matabele, and there was a genocide in Rhodesia. And there were mass graves, or Rwanda, when there was the genocide in Rwanda with the guys running down the street with machetes, hacking people up. It was warring tribes. It was tribes warring against each other. And Europeans didn't understand the tribal nature and the tribal aspect of the African continent and how it had divided itself. And so we come in and we draw these lines. You see this in the Middle East, right? Where you got the Kurds on the border of Syria, Turkey, like Iraq, and you're like, why isn't there like a Kurdish nation? Like, why do we have to keep going in and protecting the Kurds? Why can't the Kurds have their own spot, right? And this is what was set up for the Jews in Israel was this is your place, right? And this is what Americans are asking for in America. Like, no, this is America. This is our place. Now, the problem with America is we were federalized into 50 different states. And those 50 different states had distinct cultures within those states. Louisiana and the Creole Cajun culture of Louisiana is not the same as North Dakota. It doesn't mean we can't intermingle and do business together, but we don't really live amongst each other, not for long periods of time. Somebody from North Dakota might move to Louisiana for work and stay there for a while and then move back to North Dakota or go to Minnesota or go to a place that's more suitable for their culture. Louisiana intermingles very well with Southeast Texas or Mississippi, right? It's because like we have similarities in our culture. We kind of overlap in many different ways. Like I was born in Louisiana, but I basically grew up in Texas, right? And I can go back to Louisiana and intermingle with like anyone from New Orleans to Lake Charles with no issue and have no problems. I feel right at home. I have a blast. These are my people. I understand these people, you know? But if you get me out into Indiana, right, and I ask for a glass of sweet tea, they'll look at me like I'm cross-eyed, like I got a dick growing out of my forehead. It's not the same thing. It's not the same place. People are tribal. And what they've done in the United States by moving communities around, destroying the entire internal tribal development of people and turning it into one large nation, they've created division and hate and spite towards each other. A Californian isn't a Texan. You'll see it when you drive into Texas from the West. It'll be like, leave your politics in California. You like, we don't want your politics here. There will be billboards that say that because we're not the same. We're not the same people. We we are all Americans from the United States of Americans, uh, United States of Americans, United States of America, but we're not the same people. You're Californian, I'm Texan, or I'm Louisianan, you know? And even within those states, you have like separate communities, right? Like somebody from Amarillo is not the exact same as somebody from Houston. You're within the same state, but you're not the same. This is why Robert E. Lee, whenever the Civil War broke out and Virginia entered the Civil War, he fought for the South because he was a Virginian first. He wasn't an American first. He was a Virginian first, right? This is how it's always worked out. And the founders of the United States understood the tribal nature of people. This is why we have troubles with the Somalis. They come from this war-torn tribal culture. And you'll even like if you go look up like Somalis on like TikTok or whatever, they're talking about their tribal feuds. You have these separate Somali like play communities within Minnesota that are talking about old tribal feuds from Somalia because those feuds, those differences, those separations live deep within them. It's deep within their mind. They are not the same. These tribes do not belong intermingling together in that way, not in a forced integration way. This is why I will always say that forced segregation is just as bad as forced integration. And we saw this in South Africa. So, what happened here around in the Pretoria area, just outside of Pretoria, there's a place called Kleinfontein. In 1992, just after apartheid had been ended, before the ANC took power, a, a community of Afrikaners set up a town called Kleinfontein. Kleinfontein is an Afrikaner community. It is a border community. It has been since 1992 when it was established. Like coloreds aren't allowed there, Zulu aren't allowed there, Xhosa aren't allowed there. This is an Afrikaner community. They understood this is my tribe. These are the people I belong to. We share culture, we share tradition, we share customs, we share a language. And then you have this explosion somewhere around here, somewhere, this area, somewhere in that area, you have Aranya, right? And Aranya's gotten a lot of side glances over the last, few years because it's an Afrikaner community. They say it's a whites only community. No, English aren't allowed there. Like you can visit, you're not, but you have to apply. It is a corporate entity. An Afrikaner bought a piece of desert in the middle of South Africa and in order to move there and own property there, you have to apply to this man who bought this property, this piece of desert, and prove not only that you're Afrikaans and that you're an Afrikaner, but you also have to prove that you bring something to the table, that you have value, that you can work, that you can contribute to the community and build the community up. That's what this place is. You can say it's a whites only settlement. Well, it's an Afrikaner only settlement. Try being a British man and applying there. They'll laugh you out of the town. You're not going to live there just because you're white. It's an Afrikaner settlement. So you have a couple of little spots like that have popped up in South Africa of these Afrikaners trying to preserve their culture, their heritage, their language, and they're demonized for it. And so that's what America's dealing with at this time. You have these Somalis coming in, taking advantage. They have no connection to us, no connection to our system. They don't understand the Western way of life. They see free money and they're just like, fuck it, give it to me. Like I'm looking out for me and my tribe. I'm sending that money back to Mogadishu. I'm not leaving that money here in America. because it's a tribal component built in within these people over thousands and thousands and thousands of years. This is not some racist thing. This is just they have their people. Who are their people? Well, Ilhan Omar talks about it all the time. She is in Congress to represent Somalia. She is not in Congress to represent Americans. She's not American. She doesn't see herself as Americans. This is why Teddy Roosevelt had given that speech on hyphenated Americans. It's unacceptable. We're either one people or we're not. If we have to become one people in some way, shape, or form, is what he was trying to say. It was post, obviously post the Civil War. So this whole idea of the nation as one unit had become huge. This is not the way we were founded. We were founded very tribally. We were set up in separate colonies. We divided ourselves by religion. We divided ourselves by family. We did not like we did not live a Catholic did not live amongst the Protestants. That's just not the way that the world worked at that time because there was an understanding these are my people. These are the people I live amongst. And this is a lot of what's wrong with America now. There's no American identity. There can't be an American identity because America is so diasporic, that such diversity among the nation that then you get these people coming up with these fucked up identities. Well, I'm lesbian, I'm gay, I'm bi, I'm trans, I'm this, I'm that, I'm African American, I'm foundational Black American, I'm they're like we don't even identify each other as the same. And no one says I'm Texan anymore. Texan isn't an identity anymore. No one says I'm Alaskan, I'm Hawaiian. Well, you'll hear Hawaiian sometimes, but even in New York, whenever the flood of like Italians and Irish and Germans were coming over through New York in the 1800s, they didn't identify as New Yorkians. They identified as Irish or Jewish or German or Italian or Sicilian because that tribal network within our brains triggers it. It's like if you ever go to a foreign country, if you're ever in a foreign country, away from America, away from all the traditions and cultures that you're familiar with, and you run into another American, you immediately click. You may see this person again in America. You may keep in touch, and in America, y'all get together. Suddenly, you just like, why? What was it about this person that I like? This person is boring or rude or whatever. But in that moment, when you're away, when you're completely outside of your normal environment, you see that familiarity as something to cling on to. It's a natural reaction. When we were in New Orleans, I brought Beatrix to New Orleans in what 2014, I think it was 13 or 14, and we were in New Orleans, and I remember we were talking to some guy on the street, one of the street performers. We were just chatting with him, and he obviously Beatrix has an accent, and he asked her, "Where are you from?" And she's like, "South Africa." And he goes, "Oh, that's cool. There's a Cape Tonian on Bourbon Street." And we always laughed at that. We always thought it was funny. But he understood immediately, like you will recognize this as welcoming, as comforting. It was just instinctual for him to let her know, "Oh yeah, there's a Cape Tonian over there." And that's another thing. Like you'll hear that Cape Tonian. What is that? Well, that's somebody from Cape Town. They're not. South African. I mean, they are South African, but they're from South Africa, but they're Cape Tonian. They identify with that tribe, that place, that settlement, that location. That's how people think. That's how people identify. You're never going to have one of these Somalians say, I'm Minnesotan or I'm, Michigander or whatever. They're always going to say, I'm Somali American. There's this guy, Frank Zuna. Let me see if I can pull that up. I have that. Yeah, right here. So this guy, Frank Zuna, is really interesting. He always talks about, he goes, when you talk to somebody from Africa that comes to the US to visit and you say, where are you from? They'll say, I'm from Nigeria. But if you ask them, what is Nigerian culture? They'll freeze. They'll look at you like like you're like insane because there's 54 different tribes in Nigeria. If you ask them about the tribe they come through, the language they speak, the culture they speak, they can tell you that, but they cannot tell you about Nigerian culture because there is not a single Nigerian culture. Just like there's not a single Western culture. I've been on about this for years. This does not exist. This is a fantasy. The idea of a Western culture is a fantasy. I've been to Germany. It is different. It is not America. There is no, like, yeah, they're white. Okay. And they're interesting and they're nice. And I enjoyed my time there, but they're not Texan. They're not from Louisiana. Like, we're not the same. There are distinct differences in the way that they interact with each other, their architecture, which is beautiful. I love it. It's gorgeous. I love being there. I'd love to go back. It's a wonderful place to visit. The people were extremely friendly, extremely helpful. If I got turned around somewhere, I didn't understand how the train worked or whatever, they would help. I would ask. Most of them, everybody I ran into spoke some English and was able to help in some way, which was really funny because the first person I ran into, he spoke to me in German. I got off the train. Well, I got out of the airport and I'd taken the train from the airport into the heart of Frankfurt. And I come walking up out of the train station and this he's a young guy. He was probably in his 20s, I guess. And it was funny because he said something to me in German and I said, I'm sorry, man, I don't know what you just said. And he goes, oh, you're American. And I was like, yeah. And he goes, and then he started talking to me in Spanish. And he asked me, he was like, he goes, fuego. And I was like, oh yeah, I got a lighter. Yeah. But it was funny because he even knew then in what was this, 2013? No, it was 2014, I guess. Yeah, it was early 2014. So Beatrix, we went to New Orleans in 2013. Yeah. And so he even knew, he was like, yeah, well, Americans even know Spanish because of the amount of Mexicans and Venezuelans and Salvadorians and Colombians and Cubans and blah, 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 blah that go into America. He like, it was just like he already knew, like there was this intermingling of tribes into our nation. It does not mean we can't work together. It does not mean that we can't get along with each other. But if you go into Chinatown, it is Chinatown. The signs in Chinatown are in Chinese. Sometimes they'll have the sign beneath it in English as well, but there is there are signs in Chinese. If you go to the Diamond District in New York, that is a Jewish area. That is not a white area, that is Jewish. You'll see the Orthodox Jews walking around. It is a different place. It is not Houston. And even Houston isn't Houston. I mean, like there's Montrose and there's Memorial and there's then you have the Galleria, you have Cypress, you have Katy. Magnolia, the Woodlands. You have all these disparate regions, and we understand that instinctively. We know that. This is why policing in the United States is so fucked up because you have HPD, Houston Police Department, and you bring a guy out of the Woodlands living in a wealthier area and have him policing the Fifth Ward, where he does not understand the culture of the people in the Fifth Ward. He does not belong there. These are not his people. And so when they act a certain way, he takes it personally. He takes himself at threat. Whereas somebody from that area would be like, man, stop being like that, dude. Or just laugh along with him or whatever. But there's this complete division, the distrust that we have within our nation comes from, why does this say that? It says it's paused. Move to bottom. I don't know. I hope it's not paused. It says it's paused. I don't know why it would be paused. Last time it said it was paused, it wasn't paused. So I'm going to assume it's not paused because I'm going to play this here in a second. But yeah, you get this issue. These people, they don't know what they're doing. Imagine like taking somebody out of Amarillo, Texas, wearing tight Wranglers and a cowboy hat, and put him in the middle of New York City and tell him to police Queens. He's not going to understand Queens. He's not going to know nothing about Queens. The accent's going to be weird to him. People are going to like I've been to New York and I like the people in New York. I've always enjoyed the people in New York, but things are different. Depending on where you go, there are different cultures, there are different routines, there are different ways of interacting with people. It's like these like like if you meet somebody that is initially from Miami that grew up in Miami, they'll tell you like it's not the same anymore with all these people moving in from New York. It's a different place now. It's not the same place as it was. Like we don't have a people anymore. Our people are dead, are gone. The culture that was Miami in the 80s when Miami Vice was like so popular, it's not that anymore. It's something different now. It is not the same thing. And we all instinctively understand this. We know, like, if we pick up and we move to a new area because we got a new job, the culture of that company is going to be different. The area that we're moving to is going to be different. We're going to have to meet new people. We're going to have to learn new things. We got to learn the area. There are differences. There are like nat. There are differences between people. There are a reason that many cultures live within an extended family, right? And it's not always because it's necessary. Sometimes it's because it's necessary, but a lot of it is to preserve that family unit. We are this. This is what we are. This is like back in the old days. This is our coat of arms. This is who we are. This represents us. This is what we belong to. This is what we believe. This is how we act. This is how we interact. And everybody understands that to some degree. But the liberal mindset wants you to dismiss it and to act like that does not exist, that differences aren't a thing. We're all blank slates and we can just put whatever we want onto an individual, and all cultures are, you know, equal and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And there's no reason that we can't live amongst each other. Well, yeah, there is. There are plenty of reasons we can't live amongst each other. Absolutely plenty of reasons that we cannot live amongst each other. There's a reason that divorces have severe consequences because you're removing the child from a natural culture of identity within a family unit and bringing them into something that is missing a piece of them. You're introducing them to a world that part of them is gone. Even if you see your father or your mother on a regular basis, it's it's there's something absent. There's something that's no longer there within you. When you remove a person from their homeland, something's missing. They're missing a part of them. Like Lili Fondiplas is extremely thankful for the welcome that she received by the United States in being a refugee from South Africa. She has I think she said a 6 year old child or whatever who hadn't slept since he was an infant, hadn't slept through the night since he was a baby because of the dangers of where they lived, because their farm had been attacked. And luckily, the attackers didn't get to them, but all their farm workers and everybody was crammed into their farmhouse and not on their own, not in their own houses on the property, but crammed into the main farmhouse because they were so scared of what was going on. And this child hadn't slept since he was like 18 months old or whatever. I can't remember how old she said. And now they're in Dallas and he sleeps through the night. Well, good for that child. I mean, but there's always going to be a part of that child that's missing because that child has been taken away from his land, from his home. And Lily will never feel the same about Dallas as she does about South Africa. You can talk to my mother-in-law, you can talk to my wife. They love that place. Absolutely adore it. I love it. I've been there several, well, not several. I've been there twice. I love it. I think it's so interesting, so much fun. I love the wildlife. The people that I've met are extremely friendly. But I've also gone to nicer areas. I haven't, gone into the townships. I haven't, experienced all the poverty. I mean, I've driven by, but I didn't go in there. I didn't meet the people. I didn't deal with the gangs, you know, because well, it's like if you live in New Orleans, right? If you're a white guy living in New Orleans in on the nicer side, in the nicer areas in New Orleans, you don't go into Algiers. You don't belong there. Like it's understood. When I lived in Katy for what, 20 something years. I didn't go into the fifth ward. I drove through it like for work because I drive truck, but that was in the middle of the day. Nothing was happening. Nobody was out, but I didn't go in there. That wasn't my place. I didn't belong there. Like, and all these things are understood. All these things are naturally understood by people. And we're told because of our liberal sensibilities and we're anti-racist and beyond, you know, division and beyond borders and et cetera, there are no differences. Bullshit, there are no differences. There are plenty of differences. I'm married to somebody from South Africa. There are plenty of differences. Trust me. It doesn't mean it's bad. It doesn't mean it's good, but there are differences. Shit, for the first year my wife lived here at this house. My dad was here. I was driving over the road. My dad lived here while he was getting ready, while my mom and him were looking for a house up in the Magnolia area. They lived in the same house. They couldn't understand each other. They didn't understand a word that was coming out of each other's mouth. They didn't know what they were saying. It was just like, okay. She was speaking English. He was speaking English. They didn't know what they were saying. Like they were completely lost. They were just like, all right, whatever. This person lives here, but I don't know what they're talking about. They're speaking English, but it's not my English. Now they understand each other perfectly fine. They get along great. Like my mom and dad love Beatrix, but I mean, it was an adjustment. There's a difference. There's differences. And we can't pretend like there's not. Anyway, I want to play this because I find this guy so interesting. This was off of a State of the Nation. It's a South African podcast.
The countries I just mentioned were not put together by Africans who live in it. Rhodesia, southern or northern Rhodesia, was not put together by the Africans who live in it. Nigeria was not put together by the tribes that live in it. Ghana was not put together by the tribes that live in it. Benin, Togo, Mali, none of them. So the true independence would have been, you'd have told the Europeans, please go, because we want independence, not from you, but from each other. Because we were independent tribes and you force us together. So you say to the colonizer, please leave because we want independence from each other. So after the colonizer left, the countries should have turned to each other and say, goodbye. Mr. Kosa, you and your people go back to where you were. The Zulus go to where you were, and the rest. That would have been the real independence.
All right. So, I mean, he's making that same point that I was just making. We're not all the same. We have different cultures, we have different languages, we have different ways of looking at things, different worldviews, different structures of living, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And there's nothing wrong with that. There's absolutely nothing wrong with that. Not everybody has to be intermingled into this single race of human being. Yeah, we're all humans. We all bleed the same. We're all children of God. I get it. I'm not saying that someone's life is less valuable. I'm saying there are some people I don't want to live around. There are some people I don't want to be around. There are some people that I'm directly related to I don't want to be around. I don't have to be part of their nation. I don't have to be part of their tribe. And it's okay. It's okay to say that. It's okay to think that. It's okay to believe that. You have the choice of who you interact with. You have the choice of who you marry. You have the choice of who you date. And you have the choice of where you live and who you live around. And that's okay. When that choice is taken away from you, when your culture is being ripped from you, and this forced integration is being shoved down your throat, it's going to create friction, violence, theft, crime of all sorts. You see it in the grooming gangs in England. Some people should not be intermingling. They have no business being around my children, around my wife, around my family, around my friends. Some people don't belong in certain cultures, and that's okay to say that. You don't have to say that every culture is the same. Obviously, not every culture is the same. If every culture was the same, no one would ever go to war. So we really have to just come to the realization that this liberal bullshit that we've been fed our entire lives, a blank slate, every culture is equal, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, doesn't work. It hasn't worked. It's not working. And if we choose to segregate not forced segregation, but choose to segregate. We put a wall up around our community. We put a wall up around our house. We put a wall up around our family. We have that right. That is part of freedom. You choose who you integrate with, you choose who you segregate from. That is freedom. What Aranya and Klein-Fontaine are doing is freedom. They are expressing their freedom to interact with those people they want to interact with. And we don't have a right to tell them they're wrong doing it. The Japanese have the right to be Japanese. China has the right to be Chinese. Russia has the right to be Russian. England has the right to be English. America has the right to be American. We don't have to accept every third world nation, every culture among our borders. And we have the right to self segregate. And it's irritating that people think that there's something wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with that. That's the way people have lived forever. This global world order where all is utopia and get along is bullshit. And it always has been bullshit. There are 27,000 murders a year in South Africa. 30 some odd years after the end of apartheid. The experiment has failed. The nation is failing. And America is heading down the same track. All in the name of some utopian dream dreamt up by Cecil Rhodes and Fabians and these fucking overeducated rich kids that think life is just a box of chocolates. Well, you never know what you're going to get, and it may not be exactly what you wanted. So, anyway, that's this episode. I will be reading records 16 through 20 of We, probably Friday, maybe today, but probably Friday. We'll see. Anyway, y'all have a happy new year.